What happens when a powerful CEO, grappling with memory loss, becomes the pawn in a dangerous game of manipulation? Can his loyal maid uncover the truth before his wife seals his fate? Elliot Harrington is struggling to remember his past, but Victoria, his wife, is determined to control his future. As secrets unravel and betrayal comes to light, will Elliot reclaim his life and legacy? Or will he remain trapped in a web of deceit? Cleo is his only ally, but will her loyalty be enough to stop a woman willing to destroy everything for power? If you're hooked on this story and want more, like and subscribe to our channel. Click the bell to get updates on our latest content. Trust us, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Elliot Harrington was a name known in boardrooms across the world, his presence commanding respect and admiration. As the CEO of Harrington Enterprises, his decisions shaped industries, built empires, and brought innovations that changed lives. He had it all: a successful career, a beautiful wife, Victoria, and a family legacy that he was set to pass down. But that all came crashing down one fateful afternoon. It was a day like any other when Elliot's life changed forever. A sudden car crash, rain pounding down, and then nothing. The accident was a blur. He remembered flashes of light, the screeching of tires, and then blackness. When he woke, he was lying in a hospital bed, the steady beep of machines the only sound breaking the silence. His head throbbed with pain, and his vision swam. He struggled to focus, but everything felt wrong. His body felt foreign, as though it didn't belong to him. He turned to look at his wife, Victoria, who sat by his side, her face a mask of concern. The soft glow of the hospital lights illuminated her features, but Elliot couldn't help but notice the slight tension in her jaw. "Elliot, darling," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're awake." "Thank God." He blinked, trying to piece together his surroundings, but his mind was a fog. He tried to remember the events that led him here, but nothing came. Not the accident, not even his latest business meetings. His head swam with confusion as he looked at her, waiting for something familiar, but all he felt was an overwhelming sense of disconnection. "Victoria, what happened?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "You were in an accident, sweetheart," she explained gently, her hand brushing his. "But you're okay now. Just some memory loss. You'll be fine. You just need some time to heal." "Memory loss?" Elliot's heart raced as a wave of panic gripped him. "What do you mean? What kind of memory loss?" Victoria leaned in closer, her lips brushing his forehead in a soft kiss. "Don't worry. It's temporary. You'll remember soon enough." But the unease settled deep within Elliot's chest. Something didn't feel right. His thoughts were hazy, and he had no memory of the past several months. No recollection of meetings, decisions, or even his own business dealings. He couldn't even remember how long it had been since the last time they had shared a conversation like this. As the days passed, Victoria remained by his side, caring and attentive. But there was a coldness to her presence now. The loving wife he remembered seemed to have faded away, replaced by someone who, although still kind, carried an edge of impatience in her every move. Elliot couldn't pinpoint it, but something about her was different, something that made him feel uneasy. Victoria would constantly remind him of the important documents he needed to sign for Harrington Enterprises, the company that had once been his pride. "Elliot, these need to be signed," she would say, holding up papers in front of him. "It's crucial for the future of the company. You know this." Every time she handed him a document, Elliot could feel the pressure mounting. His head was still a whirlpool of confusion, his memory like a shattered glass he couldn't quite piece back together. Yet, each time, he would look at the papers, unable to remember anything about what he was signing. Numbers and terms blurred together in front of him, but Victoria's insistence made him feel as though it was the only thing he could do. I don't remember this," he confessed one day, his voice breaking as his eyes met Victoria's. "I don't remember making these decisions. What's happening?" What am I signing? Victoria's face softened for just a moment, her eyes searching his face as if trying to gauge the depth of his confusion. It's all right, darling. I've been handling things while you've been recovering. But these signatures are important. You've trusted me with everything. You know that. Elliot hesitated, his pulse quickening. The trust he once had in her was starting to feel like something distant, like a memory he couldn't quite reach. He hadn't been involved in any of these decisions, yet here he was, expected to sign away the future of a company he had built with his own hands. I can't, Elliot murmured, shaking his head as he looked at the pile of papers. I can't remember. But Victoria pressed on, her grip on his hand tightening ever so slightly. You don't need to remember, Elliot. You just need to trust me. It was then that Cleo, the maid who had served the Harrington family for years, began to notice something was off. Cleo had always been a quiet observer of the household, one who saw and heard things that others didn't. She had watched the relationship between Elliot and Victoria grow over the years, and she had always admired the love they seemed to share. But now, something felt different. Cleo noticed the subtle shifts in Victoria's behavior, the way she insisted on certain things being done a particular way, especially when it came to Elliot's recovery. There was an urgency in her voice whenever she spoke of the documents Elliot needed to sign, and Cleo couldn't help but notice how Elliot, still confused and vulnerable, seemed to be constantly pressured into doing things he didn't fully understand. As the days went on, Cleo watched quietly from the sidelines. She saw how Victoria hovered over Elliot, always by his side, but never quite acting like the woman who had once been his loving wife. Victoria would smile and reassure him, but there was a coldness in her eyes, something Cleo could not ignore. It wasn't just the signs of impatience Cleo noticed, it was the way Victoria had begun to push Elliot harder, urging him to sign more documents, and all the while, not fully explaining what they were for. Cleo's heart grew heavy with worry. There was something Victoria wasn't telling Elliot, something that felt deeply wrong. One evening, Cleo overheard Victoria speaking to someone on the phone, her voice low and urgent. He doesn't need to remember, she was saying. Once the papers are signed, it'll be done. He won't even know what happened. A chill ran down Cleo's spine as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Something sinister was at play. Cleo had always been loyal to the Harrington family, but now her instincts told her that she had to act quickly. She couldn't let Victoria take advantage of Elliot in his vulnerable state. Cleo's resolve was clear now. She would protect Elliot from the woman who had once stood by him, but who now seemed determined to exploit his memory loss for her own gain. Cleo's suspicions had been gnawing at her for days. It wasn't just the constant pressure that Victoria put on Elliot to sign papers. It was the urgency in her voice, the cold determination that could be seen in her eyes whenever she handed him a stack of documents. Cleo had always respected Victoria as the lady of the house, the woman who stood by Elliot's side through thick and thin. But now, something about the way Victoria was acting felt wrong. Over the past week, Cleo had watched as Elliot's confusion deepened, his mind struggling to piece together even the most basic facts about his life and his company. The man she had known was still there, beneath the fog of his memory loss, but the sharp, calculating edge that once defined him seemed dulled. In his current state, he trusted Victoria more than anyone. But Cleo wasn't convinced. Something in the way Victoria had been pushing him to sign document after document set off alarm bells in Cleo's mind. Determined to find out what was really going on, Cleo began her quiet investigation. She knew she had to be discreet. If Victoria found out she was looking into the documents, it could jeopardize everything. So, she began her search by first looking through the papers Victoria had insisted Elliot sign. Cleo waited until late one evening when the house was quiet, and the soft murmur of the night provided her the cover she needed. She quietly slipped into Victoria's study while she was away, her heart racing as she went through the drawers. The documents were exactly as Victoria had said. important contracts for the future of the company. But as Cleo sifted through them, her eyes caught something odd. The figures didn't add up. The financial documents were riddled with irregularities, payments to obscure accounts, transfers of large sums of money, and unfamiliar signatures. At first glance, they seemed legitimate, but Cleo was no fool. She had worked in the house for years, managing the day-to-day affairs of the Harringtons, and she knew how things should look. She'd seen how Victoria handled the company's finances, and this was not the same. Cleo dug deeper, her fingers trembling as she pulled out a specific contract. The figures were large, the stakes high. But what stood out to her the most was a clause she had never seen before. Hidden deep within the legal jargon was a line that transferred ownership of Harrington Enterprises to a new entity, one Victoria controlled. The clause was carefully worded, and if Elliot signed it, he would be handing over the future of the company without even realizing it. Her heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just a business deal, it was a calculated takeover. Victoria was using Elliot's memory loss to exploit him, and Cleo was certain now that she had been planning this for months. The memory loss, the confusion, it was all part of the plan. Victoria knew exactly what she was doing. She had carefully positioned herself to take control of everything, from the wealth to the empire Elliot had spent his life building. Cleo's thoughts raced as she pieced everything together. She had seen how Victoria had been manipulating Elliot's memory, the constant reassurance, the way she would downplay Elliot's confusion, telling him to trust her and sign what was needed. But now Cleo understood. It wasn't just about helping Elliot recover. It was about gaining full control over everything he had built. And once Elliot signed those documents, it would be too late. Cleo felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This was more than just a betrayal of trust. It was a betrayal of everything Elliot had worked for. His entire legacy was at risk, but Cleo wasn't going to let that happen. She had watched over Elliot like a guardian, and now she knew what she had to do. She made a vow to herself that night. She would expose Victoria for what she truly was. Cleo would protect Elliot, no matter the cost. She couldn't allow him to be manipulated further, especially now that she knew the full scope of Victoria's plan. The documents were clear, and the truth was undeniable. Victoria had been plotting this takeover from the start, knowing that Elliot's memory loss would make him an easy target. The next morning, Cleo set her plan into motion. She knew she couldn't act hastily. She had to be smart about it. The first thing she needed was more evidence. She couldn't just rely on the documents. She needed to uncover more, something that would be irrefutable. She decided to take the papers to a trusted lawyer, someone she knew who could analyze them and confirm the foul play. But even that wouldn't be enough. She had to make sure Elliot would listen, that he would believe her over Victoria. Cleo also knew that she had to move carefully. Victoria was a formidable adversary. She had spent years building an image of the perfect wife, and if Cleo wasn't careful, she could easily be dismissed as an overzealous servant trying to undermine the family. Cleo had to think like Victoria, anticipate her every move. Victoria had been using Elliot's weakness to her advantage for so long, but Cleo wasn't about to let that continue. As she carefully folded the papers and tucked them away, Cleo's mind raced. Time was running out. The longer Victoria had control, the harder it would be to stop her. Elliot's confusion was becoming more intense with each passing day, and Victoria was pressing harder than ever to get him to sign the final documents. Cleo couldn't afford to wait. That evening, after everyone had retired for the night, Cleo slipped into the study again. This time she was more determined. She needed one last piece of evidence, something that would link everything together. After hours of searching, she found it. An email sent from Victoria to an overseas account, instructing the transfer of funds to a newly opened offshore company. The email was dated 2 days before the accident. The pieces were falling into place. Cleo carefully printed the email, knowing it was the final piece she needed to prove Victoria's betrayal. As she stood up to leave, she felt a sense of resolve wash over her. This was no longer just about protecting the company. It was about protecting Elliot's future, his legacy, and the life he had built. The battle lines were drawn. Cleo knew what she had to do. The house felt eerily silent as Cleo paced back and forth in the hallway, clutching the documents she had painstakingly gathered over the past few days. Each piece of evidence she'd uncovered now felt like a burden on her chest, too heavy to carry alone. She knew what she had to do, but the weight of her decision made her hesitate. Confronting Victoria wasn't just about exposing her deceit, it was about protecting Elliot, the man who had once trusted her without question. Cleo had spent years observing the dynamics between Elliot and Victoria. She had seen the small cracks in their relationship, but nothing prepared her for the truth she had uncovered. Victoria wasn't just manipulating Elliot for his fortune. She was manipulating him for control of everything: the company, the wealth, and perhaps even the love that had once bound their marriage together. It was time to take action. Cleo waited until evening when Victoria was in the study, preparing for another one of her late-night work sessions. Elliot, still recovering from his memory loss, had been resting in his room, confused, tired, and growing more vulnerable each day. Cleo knew this was the moment. If she didn't confront Victoria now, the damage could be irreversible. With determination in her step, Cleo approached the study, her heart pounding. She wasn't afraid of Victoria, but the thought of exposing the woman she had once admired felt like a betrayal in itself. Yet, she knew there was no turning back. Cleo knocked firmly on the study door. "Victoria!" she called out. There was a brief pause before Victoria's voice responded from inside. "Come in." As Cleo entered, she saw Victoria sitting behind the large desk, her face illuminated by the glow of a desk lamp. Her eyes flickered up from the documents in front of her, her expression unreadable. "Cleo," Victoria said coolly, "what brings you here at this hour?" "I need to talk to you," Cleo replied, stepping forward with the folder in her hands. "It's about Elliot and the documents." Victoria's eyes narrowed, but she didn't move. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "What about them?" "The paperwork is in order, Cleo. Everything is fine." Cleo's grip on the folder tightened. She knew Victoria would try to dismiss her, but she wasn't going to let that happen. "No, Victoria. It's not fine. I've seen the documents. I've seen the transfers, the clauses, everything. You're taking advantage of Elliot's memory loss." Victoria's face remained impassive, but Cleo could see the slight twitch in her fingers as they tightened their grip on the edge of the desk. "I don't know what you're talking about. Elliot is in no condition to handle the company right now. I've been doing what's necessary to protect our future." Cleo took a deep breath. This was it. She stepped forward and placed the folder on the desk with a heavy thud, the papers inside a stark contrast to Victoria's polished demeanor. "No, Victoria. You're using his condition to manipulate him. You're trying to take control of everything. The company, the wealth, everything." Victoria's calm exterior cracked for just a second as her eyes flickered toward the folder, but she quickly regained her composure. "You don't understand, Cleo. You've never been in my shoes. I've had to manage everything since the accident. I've been the one holding everything together while you stand by, watching. You think you know what's best for Elliot, but you don't. He's weak, confused, and he needs me." Cleo's voice rose slightly, her frustration spilling over. "That's exactly it, Victoria. You've been manipulating him, using his confusion to get him to sign away everything. These documents, they're designed to make sure he never regains control. I've been watching, I've been listening, and I know what you're doing." Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Enough, Cleo! You've crossed a line. I've been nothing but patient with you. But this is betrayal." Cleo didn't back down. "No, Victoria. The betrayal isn't from me. It's from you. You've been playing a dangerous game. and I won't let you ruin Elliot's life." Victoria's eyes darkened, and her voice dropped to a low, venomous tone. "You have no idea what you're up against. Do you really think anyone will believe you over me? I've been by Elliot's side for years. I've built this empire with him. And you're just the maid." The words stung, but Cleo stood tall. "Maybe I'm just the maid, but I'm the one who sees the truth. I'm the one who's been here for years, watching everything unfold. And now, I'll make sure Elliot knows what you've been doing." For the first time, Victoria's mask of calm slipped completely. "You think you can take me down? You think anyone will listen to you? You're nothing, Cleo. Just a woman who's trying to protect a man who doesn't even remember what's happening to him." Cleo's eyes burned with determination. "I'm not trying to take you down, Victoria. I'm trying to protect Elliot from you. You've been using his vulnerability to manipulate him, and I won't stand by and let that happen." Victoria glared at Cleo, her face a mixture of fury and fear. "You'll regret this, Cleo. You're making a dangerous enemy." Cleo turned on her heel, her heart pounding, but her resolve unwavering. "If you want to make me your enemy, so be it. But you're not going to get away with this." As Cleo left the study, she felt a sense of clarity she hadn't had before. The confrontation was just the beginning. She knew what she had to do next: convince Elliot of the truth before it was too late. But there was one problem. Elliot, despite his growing doubts, was still torn between his love for Victoria and the painful reality that Cleo was presenting him. As Cleo walked down the hallway, she could hear Elliot's footsteps approaching. He appeared at the top of the stairs, his face drawn with confusion. "Cleo," he called, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "What's going on? Why is she so angry?" Cleo paused, her heart aching for him. She knew this was the moment that would determine everything. She had to make Elliot see the truth, but it wouldn't be easy. "Elliot," Cleo said softly, her voice trembling with the weight of what she had to say. "You need to trust me. There's something Victoria hasn't told you, something she's hiding. I've been trying to protect you." Elliot looked at her, his brow furrowed, the doubt in his eyes slowly growing. "But I love her, Cleo. I don't want to believe it." "I know you don't," Cleo said, stepping forward. "But the truth is more important than the love you feel right now. Please, Elliot, listen to me." Elliot stood there, frozen, his emotions torn between his growing doubts and his love for Victoria. Cleo could see it in his eyes. He was trapped, caught between reality and the world Victoria had carefully constructed for him. The days that followed Cleo's confrontation with Victoria were filled with a growing tension in the house. Victoria, now aware that Cleo knew her secrets, had become more erratic, more forceful. She continued to pressure Elliot, pushing him to sign more documents, all while maintaining the facade of being a loving and concerned wife. Elliot, still caught between his fading memories and the uncertainty surrounding his wife, had grown more withdrawn. His trust in Victoria was shaking, but he struggled to see through the web of manipulation she had expertly woven around him. Cleo, though determined to protect Elliot, knew she couldn't do this alone. She had gathered the evidence, confronted Victoria, but still, the power and influence Victoria had over Elliot was undeniable. Cleo needed help, someone who could offer insight, someone who knew Elliot as well as she did. But who could she turn to? The answer came sooner than she expected. One evening, as Cleo was quietly going over the documents in the small study, she heard the front door open. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. She paused, her heart racing. It was too late for any visitors, and she had expected the house to be quiet. Cleo stood up, walking cautiously toward the door. Her mind was filled with thoughts of Victoria. But when she opened the door, it was someone she hadn't seen in years. "Jack!" Cleo exclaimed, her voice a mix of surprise and relief. Standing before her was Jack Donovan, Elliot's childhood friend and former business partner. He was tall, with the same striking blue eyes and rugged demeanor, that had made him one of Elliot's closest confidants in their younger years. Jack had left the company long ago to pursue other ventures, but Cleo had always known that he held a deep loyalty to Elliot. They had grown up together, and Jack had always been there, in the background, whenever Elliot needed him. "Cleo, I heard about what happened. I came as soon as I could," Jack said, his voice steady, but there was an underlying concern in his expression. "How is he? Is he all right?" Cleo stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. "He's still struggling. Victoria has him under her thumb. It's like he doesn't know who to trust anymore. I've tried to protect him, but I can't do this alone. You're the only one who can help." Jack nodded gravely. "I've been watching, Cleo. I've been watching from a distance for weeks. When I heard about the accident, I knew something wasn't right. Victoria's been making some moves that I didn't trust. I never thought she would go this far." Cleo's heart skipped a beat. "You knew?" Jack lowered his voice. "I knew something was off the moment she started making decisions for the company, taking control when Elliot couldn't remember what was going on. She's been using his memory loss to her advantage. I've seen the signs, Cleo. She's playing a dangerous game." Cleo handed Jack the folder with the evidence she had gathered. "Here's what I've found. I didn't know where else to turn." Jack looked through the documents carefully, his brow furrowing as he took in the details. "This is worse than I thought. It's not just about the company, Cleo. It's everything. Elliot's entire fortune, his legacy. Victoria has been systematically stripping him of his power, and she's doing it under the guise of taking care of him." Cleo felt a surge of frustration. She's been manipulating him, making him think he's incapable of making decisions. She's using his vulnerability against him. Jack looked up at her, his eyes hard with determination. "We have to stop her, Cleo. Elliot's the one who needs to know what's really going on. If we don't act fast, Victoria will have him signing everything away." Cleo nodded, her voice steady with resolve. "We have to expose her, but we can't let her know we're onto her yet. She's dangerous, Jack. She'll do anything to keep control." Jack placed the folder on the table and turned to Cleo. "We'll need more than just evidence. We'll need a plan. We can't let her see us coming. I'll use my connections to get the legal backing we need, and we'll gather more information to present to Elliot." Cleo's heart lifted at the thought of having an ally like Jack by her side. Together, they could expose Victoria for what she truly was. But even as a sense of hope stirred inside her, she knew they were walking into dangerous territory. The days that followed were a blur of quiet planning and covert actions. Jack worked behind the scenes, reaching out to lawyers and business partners who had been involved in Elliot's past dealings. Cleo continued to keep an eye on Victoria, pretending to be her loyal servant while secretly gathering information. Every word, every action had to be carefully calculated. But it didn't take long for Victoria to catch on. She was not a woman who let things slip through her fingers easily, and the walls she had built around Elliot were not easily breached. One evening, Cleo overheard a heated conversation between Victoria and one of her associates. It was clear from the tone of her voice that she was aware someone had been watching her every move. "She knows," Victoria's voice hissed through the crack in the door. "Cleo is onto us. We can't let her ruin everything. We need to silence her, Jack. Do whatever it takes." Cleo's blood ran cold at the sound of her name. Victoria had known all along. She wasn't just trying to manipulate Elliot. She was now trying to eliminate anyone who posed a threat to her plan. Cleo quickly withdrew, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that if she wasn't careful, Victoria would stop at nothing to protect her own interests. The danger had escalated. She and Jack were now in a race against time. "Jack," Cleo said, once she found him later that night, her voice filled with urgency. "She knows we're onto her. She's already planning her next move. We have to act now." Jack's jaw tightened, his eyes filled with determination. "Then we won't give her the chance to strike first." The alliance between Cleo and Jack had become their only hope. They knew the risk they were taking by going up against Victoria, but the stakes were higher than ever. Victoria had crossed a line, and now it was time to bring her manipulation to light, before it was too late. The tension in the Harrington household had reached a breaking point. Cleo and Jack had spent weeks carefully piecing together the evidence, working in secret to expose Victoria's manipulation. But with each passing day, it became more and more apparent that Victoria wasn't going to back down. She wasn't just defending herself, she was waging war. Victoria's tactics had shifted from subtle manipulation to outright aggression. She had always been calculating, using Elliot's memory loss as a weapon to gain control of his life. But now she was determined to eliminate any threat that stood in her way, especially Cleo. It began slowly at first, with Victoria planting seeds of doubt in Elliot's mind. She would talk to him in private, her voice low and coaxing, painting Cleo as a troublemaker who was only trying to divide them. "Cleo doesn't want you to trust me, Elliot," she would say softly, her fingers brushing his hand in feigned concern. "She's only here to create chaos. You've been so confused lately, and she's only making things worse. I'm the only one who truly cares about you." Elliot, still struggling with his memory, would listen quietly. Victoria's words, despite their obvious manipulation, felt strangely comforting in his confused state. He wanted to believe in her. He needed to. But the more Cleo tried to expose the truth, the more Victoria fought back. One evening, Cleo entered the study to find a stack of papers spread across the desk. At first, she assumed it was just another batch of documents that Victoria had been working on. But when she examined them closely, her stomach twisted. They weren't just business contracts. These were falsified versions of the very documents Cleo had shown Jack earlier. The signatures were altered, the dates changed. Victoria had gone so far as to forge Elliot's signature and make it look like he had already signed away the company, transferring everything into her control. Cleo's heart raced as she realized the full extent of Victoria's desperation. She wasn't just trying to manipulate Elliot anymore. She was willing to forge documents and frame him for decisions he never made. Meanwhile, Victoria had escalated her efforts to turn Elliot completely against Cleo. One night, as Cleo entered the room with fresh linens, she overheard Victoria talking to Elliot, her tone low and intimate. "You know, Elliot," Victoria said softly, "Cleo has been acting strange lately. She's always been kind to you, but now she's getting too involved. She doesn't want you to remember anything, because she wants to control you. She wants to keep you weak so she can have all the power." Elliot, his face pale and weary, looked uncertain. His mind was a blur of confusion, and he couldn't trust his own memories anymore. But what Victoria said struck him deeply. "Are you sure?" Elliot asked quietly, his voice strained. "I've always been sure," Victoria replied, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "I've been here for you through everything. Cleo, on the other hand, has her own agenda. She wants to tear us apart." Elliot's confusion deepened, the seeds of doubt taking root. His relationship with Cleo had always been one of trust. She had been there when he needed her, supporting him through his recovery. But now, Victoria's words echoed in his mind, drowning out the voice of reason. As the days wore on, Cleo began to notice the subtle changes in Elliot. He became distant, withdrawn, his once sharp eyes clouded with uncertainty. He no longer confided in her, no longer sought her advice. Instead, he listened to Victoria's every word, and Cleo could see the trust he once had in her slipping away. Victoria wasn't just manipulating Elliot, she was turning him against everyone, even the people who had been his closest allies. Cleo could see the toll it was taking on him. His confusion was escalating, and he had started questioning every decision, every word, even the things he had once held dear. The man she had once known was slipping away, and the darkness in Victoria's grip was tightening around him. It wasn't just about the documents anymore. It was about Elliot's very mind. Victoria was breaking him down piece by piece, making him doubt everything he knew, everything he believed. The more Elliot questioned Cleo, the more she realized that Victoria's manipulation had gone deeper than she had anticipated. But Cleo couldn't give up. She couldn't let Victoria win. The truth had to come out. One evening, after a particularly tense confrontation with Victoria, Cleo sat down with Elliot in the garden. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine, the sky fading into a rich orange as the sun set. Elliot sat across from her, his hands clenched in his lap, his eyes distant. "Elliot, please," Cleo said softly, her voice trembling with urgency. "You have to remember, you have to trust me. Victoria isn't who she seems. She's been manipulating you. I have proof, Elliot. I have everything we need to stop her." Elliot looked at her, but his gaze was empty. "I don't know anymore, Cleo. My head is a mess. Everything's so confusing. I don't know who to believe." Cleo reached out, her hand trembling as she placed it on his. "Elliot, I swear to you, I'm trying to protect you. I've always been here for you, but she's trying to destroy everything you've built." Elliot's eyes flickered with something. Doubt, confusion, maybe even the faintest glimmer of recognition. But before he could say anything, Victoria appeared in the doorway, her voice cutting through the moment like a knife. "Cleo," she said coldly, "leave us alone. You're only causing more trouble. Elliot needs to rest, not be fed lies." Cleo stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm not lying, Victoria. You've manipulated him long enough. The truth will come out, and when it does, you'll have no one left to turn to." Victoria's smile was icy, her eyes narrowed with malicious intent. "You're making a mistake, Cleo. You think you can take me down? Think again." Cleo felt the weight of the moment sink in as she walked away, her mind racing with the reality of what she was up against. The stakes had never been higher, and the pressure was mounting. Elliot was on the edge. He was starting to question everything, torn between the woman he loved and the truth that Cleo was trying so desperately to reveal. But Cleo knew one thing for certain. She couldn't let Victoria win. She couldn't let Elliot fall any further into the trap that had been set for him. She had to restore his trust, show him the truth, and stop Victoria once and for all before it was too late. The tension in the air was palpable as Cleo and Jack stood together in the large, opulent sitting room of Harrington Manor. The sun was setting outside, casting an orange glow through the grand windows, but inside, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. This was the moment Cleo had been waiting for. The moment when she would finally expose Victoria's betrayal and reveal the truth to Elliot. For weeks, Cleo had been carefully building the case, gathering the evidence she needed to stop Victoria from taking everything Elliot had worked for. She and Jack had worked tirelessly, putting together a detailed account of the forged documents, the fraudulent financial transfers, and the manipulations Victoria had orchestrated to gain control over the company and Elliot's fortune. Now, it was time to confront Victoria once and for all. Elliot sat across from Cleo and Jack, his face a mixture of exhaustion and confusion. His memory had been slowly returning, but the path to clarity was a difficult one. He had been torn between two women, the wife he had loved for years, and the woman who had been there for him in his darkest moments, but whose motives had become increasingly uncertain. Cleo knew this would be a hard blow for him. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the love he still felt for Victoria, despite everything he had learned. But the evidence in her hands, the undeniable truth, would make it impossible for him to ignore any longer. Victoria entered the room, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She was composed, her face a picture of calm, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes that Cleo didn't miss. She knew Victoria had been expecting this confrontation, but Cleo was certain that the woman's arrogance would make her believe she could talk her way out of it. "You wanted to speak with me, Cleo?" Victoria said, her voice dripping with condescension as she turned to face Cleo. I assume this is more of your nonsense about protecting Elliot? You've been poisoning his mind for far too long. Cleo stood tall, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. No, Victoria, this isn't nonsense. This is the truth. The truth about what you've been doing. Victoria's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. I've been taking care of Elliot. I've been here for him while you've been hiding in the shadows, trying to stir up trouble. No, Victoria. You've been using him, Cleo replied, her voice unwavering. You've been manipulating him from the very beginning, using his memory loss as a way to control him. You've forged documents, falsified signatures, and even tried to take the company for yourself. Victoria's face tightened with fury, her eyes narrowing as she tried to mask the growing panic. You don't know what you're talking about, Cleo. This is nothing more than your imagination running wild. I'm his wife. I've been by his side through everything. I've helped him build this empire. You're the one who's trying to destroy it. Cleo held up the folder in her hands, opening it to reveal the documents and emails that would expose Victoria's lies. These are the documents you forged, the transfers you made to offshore accounts. These emails, sent from your personal account to a hidden beneficiary, prove that you were planning this from the start. You've been setting Elliot up to sign away everything he built. Victoria took a step back, her composure cracking. This is nonsense. These papers don't mean anything. You have no proof. But the evidence was irrefutable. Jack stepped forward, his voice calm but forceful as he added, The evidence we've gathered speaks for itself. Victoria, you're the one who's been manipulating Elliot. You've been exploiting his memory loss to gain control over him, his wealth, and his company. It's all here. Victoria's gaze darted between Cleo, Jack, and Elliot, who sat silently, his face pale as the weight of the truth began to settle over him. She could see the shift in him, the growing doubt in his eyes, the confusion now giving way to anger. No, Victoria hissed, her voice trembling with rage. You can't do this. You don't know what you're saying. Elliot, you need to believe me. I'm the only one who's been here for you. Cleo is trying to turn you against me. She's lying. Elliot's hand trembled as he reached for the papers. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the weight of the decision crashing down on him. The room spun around him as the truth began to sink in. Everything Victoria had told him, everything she had convinced him to believe, none of it was real. His thoughts raced as he pieced together the memories he had of their relationship, the moments when he had felt truly loved, and the moments when doubt had begun to creep in. He remembered the long hours Victoria had spent on her own, the way she had pushed him to sign things without asking questions, and the way she had manipulated his confusion, twisting his trust to suit her own ends. Victoria's voice wavered as she tried one last time to regain control. Elliot, you can't believe them. They're just trying to take me away from you. You need me. But as she spoke, something inside Elliot shifted. He stood up, his legs shaky but determined. His voice, when it came, was steady, but the power behind it was unmistakable. No, Victoria, he said, his eyes locking onto hers with a clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. I've trusted you for far too long, but I can see the truth now. You've been using me, taking advantage of my memory loss to control everything I built. You're not the person I thought you were. Victoria's face twisted with disbelief and fury. You can't do this! You can't just throw everything away! Elliot took a step back, his expression hardening. I'm not throwing anything away, Victoria. You are. You've been planning this for months. And now, I'm taking back control of my life. With those words, a weight lifted off Elliot's shoulders. The fog in his mind began to clear, and for the first time in a long while, he felt in control of his own fate. He turned to Cleo, his eyes softening with gratitude. Cleo, I didn't see it before, but now I understand. You've been trying to protect me. I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner. Cleo's eyes filled with relief as she stepped forward. You don't need to apologize, Elliot. I'm just glad you see the truth now. Elliot reached out and took her hand, his voice full of sincerity. You've been more than just a maid to me, Cleo. You've been my protector, my friend. I owe you everything. As Cleo looked into Elliot's eyes, she knew that, despite the hardships they had faced, they were about to start a new chapter together. One built on trust, loyalty, and the truth. Victoria, now defeated, turned and stormed out of the room, her face contorted with rage and betrayal. She had lost. The truth had won. For the first time in months, Elliot felt a sense of peace wash over him. The road ahead would be difficult, but with Cleo by his side, he knew he would rebuild everything he had lost. The days after Elliot's decision were a whirlwind of activity, each moment packed with the urgency of reclaiming what had been lost. With Victoria's manipulations exposed, Elliot knew there was no time to waste. He had already lost so much: time, trust, and control over his own company. But he wouldn't lose himself anymore. He was done being manipulated. He was done living in the shadows of Victoria's deceit. Elliot sat in his office, a place that had once felt like home, but now seemed like a battlefield. His eyes scanned the familiar, yet now unfamiliar documents spread across the desk in front of him. They were the lifeblood of Harrington Enterprises, the company he had built with his blood, sweat, and tears. It was his legacy, his future, and it had almost been taken from him. Beside him sat Cleo and Jack, the two people who had never abandoned him, who had fought for him when he was too lost to fight for himself. "Are you ready for this?" Jack asked, his tone steady but firm. His eyes locked with Elliot's, showing the depth of their long-standing friendship. Despite everything, Jack had never doubted Elliot's strength, even when Elliot himself had. "I have to be," Elliot replied, his voice firm. "This is my last chance to make things right." The plan was set. Elliot had already gathered the remaining board members of Harrington Enterprises for a crucial meeting. The documents Victoria had forged would be exposed, her lies would be revealed, and he would finally reclaim control of his empire. As the hour approached, Cleo placed a hand on Elliot's shoulder, offering him a silent gesture of support. He turned to her, his eyes filled with gratitude. In the past weeks, Cleo had been his constant, his rock. She had given him clarity when his mind was clouded with confusion, and she had shown him what loyalty truly meant. "You've got this," Cleo said quietly, giving him a small, reassuring smile. Elliot nodded. "I couldn't have done it without you." With that, they left the office and headed to the boardroom. The atmosphere was charged with the kind of tension that comes before a storm. Board members, most of whom had been quietly loyal to Elliot despite his recent confusion, sat around the table. There was Thomas, the finance director who had grown suspicious of Victoria's sudden control over the company's funds, and Margaret, the legal advisor who had been the first to point out inconsistencies in the company's paperwork. At the head of the table, Victoria sat, her face composed, her eyes dark with suppressed anger. She knew this was coming, and yet it didn't seem to faze her. She still believed she could control the narrative, that she could twist the truth to her advantage. Elliot took his seat, Cleo and Jack flanking him on either side. The room fell silent as he cleared his throat and stood, his heart racing but his resolve stronger than ever. "This company is mine," Elliot began, his voice cutting through the silence. "And today, I take it back." Victoria's lips curled into a tight smile, though it was clear she didn't believe him. "Elliot, I understand you're upset, but we don't need to do this. We're family. You can't possibly believe everything Cleo and Jack have been telling you." "I believe the truth, Victoria," Elliot replied, his eyes narrowing. "And I've seen the proof. The evidence of your betrayal is right here." He slid a folder across the table to the chairman, who took it with a mixture of hesitation and curiosity. As the chairman opened the folder, the room went silent again, and Elliot could see the board members' reactions shift. They were reading the documents, the forged signatures, the illegal transfers, the email exchanges between Victoria and the offshore accounts. Elliot turned to Victoria, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "You've used me, Victoria. You've manipulated me for months, taking advantage of my memory loss to steal everything I've worked for." Victoria's face went white as the room shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't what you think, Elliot," she said, her voice trembling for the first time. "I was just trying to protect us. I did it for you. We need this. Together." "No, Victoria," Elliot said firmly. "You needed it for yourself. This wasn't about me or the company. It was about your control, your greed. And now, it's over." Victoria stood up abruptly, her face red with fury. "You don't understand, Elliot. You're weak. You always were. You'll regret this." But Elliot, with the clarity of mind he had finally regained, wasn't afraid. "No, I won't. This is the right decision." As the truth settled in the room, Victoria's once solid position crumbled. The board members turned to each other, murmurs of disbelief spreading as they processed the betrayal. But when the chairman stood up, Elliot could see the change in his demeanor. The loyalty he had held for Victoria evaporated as the weight of the evidence became undeniable. "We'll need to meet tomorrow for the official vote. But as it stands, I believe Mr. Harrington has reclaimed his position as CEO, the chairman said, his voice calm but authoritative. Victoria's face twisted in rage, but she knew there was no turning back now. Her empire of lies had fallen apart. As the meeting adjourned, Elliot sat back in his chair, the weight of the moment finally sinking in. He had done it. He had reclaimed control of his company, his life, and his legacy. The man he had been before the accident, lost, confused, and manipulated, was gone. In his place stood someone who was stronger, wiser, and more determined to rebuild everything that had been taken from him. As Elliot stood, Cleo was the first to approach him. "I knew you could do it," she said softly, her eyes filled with warmth. "You're back," Elliot smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude for the woman who had stood by him when everyone else had turned away. "I couldn't have done it without you, Cleo. Thank you for believing in me." Cleo blushed slightly, but met his gaze with quiet pride. "I just did what anyone would have done. You're more than just a boss, Elliot. You're a friend." Jack, who had stood by quietly through the confrontation, clapped Elliot on the back. "This is just the beginning, my friend. You've got a lot of work ahead of you, but you've got a hell of a team behind you." Elliot nodded, the weight of the past finally lifting. "Together, we'll rebuild everything." In the weeks that followed, Elliot did just that. He took back the reins of Harrington Enterprises, rebuilding what had been lost and restoring the company to its former glory. He worked tirelessly with Cleo and Jack by his side, creating a new foundation of trust and loyalty within the company. The employees who had once felt disconnected from the leadership were now united, and Elliot's presence gave them the strength to move forward. For Elliot, this was more than just about restoring his business. It was about reclaiming his life. His memories, though still fragmented, were returning, and with them, a sense of purpose. He was no longer a man lost in confusion. He was a man who had faced betrayal and come out stronger. Cleo was more than just a loyal maid to Elliot now. With his renewed trust, she was given a prominent role in the company, one that would utilize her intelligence and dedication. She became an integral part of the business, helping Elliot manage not only the day-to-day operations, but also the intricate relationships that had once seemed so distant to her. Elliot recognized her loyalty and intelligence, and in return, Cleo was rewarded with a position of respect, a place where her hard work and dedication would be acknowledged. She had stood by him when no one else had, and now she would be an equal partner in the company's future. The days of deceit, manipulation, and confusion were behind them. Elliot and Cleo worked side by side, rebuilding the company and the trust that had been lost. Victoria, having been exposed for her betrayal, faced the consequences of her actions. She was stripped of everything: her position in the company, her wealth, and her influence. The life she had once sought to control was now out of her reach. Elliot's world was no longer clouded by doubt or manipulation. He had taken back control, not only of his company, but of his life. With Cleo by his side, he was ready to move forward, embracing the future with a newfound clarity and strength. Together, they would rebuild the empire Victoria had nearly torn apart. And this time, it would be built on trust, loyalty, and the unshakable bond they shared.